The topic of this lesson is conducting a writing conference. The learning goals for this lesson are to identify the steps in a writing conference, to explain the characteristics of an effective writing conference, and to plan for giving effective feedback to a student at the end of a conference. When setting up for a writing conference, there are three main steps that one should take. First is to go over the class rules and procedures for writing conference days. Typically, the rules and procedures for a writing conference are going to be different than the normal classroom rules and procedures for everyday teaching. Students that are not going to be doing the conference need to know their role, because if you are trying to conference with a student and you're constantly having to deal with interruptions or behavior issues from other students in the class, it's going to make the effectiveness of that conference a lot less than it could have been. So it's very important to take the time before starting writing conferences with your class and to make sure that they understand what their role will be for that, for conference days. The second step is that the other students in the class should be busy working on a writing piece. While you are conferencing with a student one-on-one, the best way to keep the other students in the classroom on task is to have them work on whatever particular writing piece that you have for your lesson for them to do for the week. That way, they are working. They're still writing on their piece while you are conferencing with the student. The third step is to call students one at a time, to conference for around 5 to 7 minutes, and to only conference with about 3 to 4 students a day. It's important to only pick 1 to 2 things to conference about with a particular writing piece. That way, you're able to get in multiple students within a class period time, and that way you don't have to spend the whole class period doing writing conferences. You can still, as a teacher, take the first 15-20 minutes of a class period and do like a mini writing lesson or whatever you had on your lesson plans for that day. And then you can go into the conference time with the students. There are 4 main steps in a writing conference. The first is to open the conference with a leading question. Anytime I pull a student up and am conducting a conference with that student, it's always a good idea to ask that student, how's your writing piece going? What do you think about it? Are you stuck on any particular thing? That way you as a teacher will know how to be the most effective with that student during the time that you're talking with them. Second is to read the student's writing. If the student is working on a really long writing piece, it's not always necessary to read their whole essay in one conference period. If I'm working on, let's just say, pronouns with a student, correct pronoun usage, I don't have to read their whole paper and sit down with them and edit that whole paper for pronouns during that little conference time. What you can do is to take 1 to 2 paragraphs, a couple paragraphs of that essay, to read over them really well and use those paragraphs to show the student how to effectively incorporate pronouns into their writing. And then the goal or the challenge for that student would be for them to go throughout the rest of their paper and to correct those errors themselves. The third step is, after reading, choose 1 thing to focus on for improving the writing piece. This is very important because sometimes when you have struggling writers, and if they bring a piece of their writing up to you and after reading it you notice that it's just full of errors, the one thing that you don't want to do is to call out every single error for that student, to mark their paper up completely in red. That can take away the student's self-esteem when it comes to writing, and it can make them not want to try and to do their best in writing anymore. So it's best just to choose 1 or 2 things that you want to work on at each writing conference. That way you're effectively teaching them how to correct 1 thing at a time, and then they can go throughout their paper and correct that 1 thing, and they've truly learned how to become a better writer from that conference. The 4th step is to wrap up and reflect. As a teacher, you always want to challenge that student with some type of a goal for the next writing conference. And have the student reflect on, do they feel more confident in their writing, after going over whatever particular thing that they need help with. So it's very important to wrap up and reflect. And we're going to talk a little bit more about wrapping up and feedback right now. When you are wrapping up a conference, I always use a conference sheet to track student data. If you teach many students, it's impossible for you to remember exactly what you worked on a particular student with from one conference to another. You're not going to remember as effectively exactly what you told that student to do or challenged that student with. So it's very important to use a conference sheet. That way, as a teacher, I can write down exactly what that student needs to work on, what our goals were that we set, and it's a way for me to use that as basically student data. I can put it in a notebook and I can easily access it whenever I need to. Second is to make a revision plan with the student. If you conference with a student but you don't make a plan, then the conference is not going to be as effective. That student needs to know what their next plan should be with their writing. If they're stuck on where to take their writing next, if it were a narrative, then the revision plan might be for you to guide that student, to help them figure out where they need to take their writing piece with. If it was some type of an editing, a grammar thing that you went over with that student, then there needs to be a revision plan made so that that student will know what they need to work on between the ending time of that conference and then the next time that they meet with you. 3 is to challenge the student to implement the plan in his piece. Instead of just working with the student, teaching them a concept, and then sending them back to their desk, it's very important to challenge the student to actually use what the skill that you've taught them, whether it's to go through the rest of their writing and to correct, if it were pronoun errors, or if it's to take a writing plan and to put it into effect for the next time. It's important for the teacher to challenge the student. 4 is to begin the next conference by following up on previous goals. If you track student data, then when it's time to conference the next time with that student, all you have to do is pull out your data sheet and you can sit down with the student one-on-one and discuss, okay, these were our goals from the last conference. How did you go about following up on this? And you can talk to the student about that before you address any type of new issue or thing that you're going to talk about. All right, so my student response is called Did You Listen? So the goal for the class is to answer these 3 questions that are written up here. 1 is to list one thing that is required for setting up a writing conference based off of my teaching. 2 is to list the steps in a writing conference that we just went over. And 3 is to list one thing that you remember under wrap up and feedback. Once you answer your questions, then I want you to choose one partner to discuss your answers with. And after you and your partner have discussed your answers, you are feeling good about them, then be prepared to share with the class. And then I also have an exit ticket for the class. I like to use exit tickets when teaching because it's a really effective, quick way for me to see if the students really gained from the lesson what I wanted them to. This exit ticket is list 3 things that you learned from the lesson. So 3 things that you did not know before that you have now learned and gained about writing conferences.